Imagine waking up, you pour your coffee, you check the news, and you realize the price of your morning commute just doubled, literally doubled overnight
Yeah.
because of missile fired, 6,000 miles away.
Right, which sounds completely surreal.
It does. And then, say you check your flight for a work trip, and the entire airport is just paralyzed because a massive federal shutdown has walked all the security agents off the job.
Yeah, the ripple effects are they're everywhere.
Exactly. And then you look out your window, and the streets of your city are filling with millions of protesters. I mean, it sounds like the premise of some dystopian thriller.
It really does.
But looking at the massive stack of source material sitting on the table today, that is the exact reality we are unpacking. So welcome to today's deep dive.
Glad to be diving into this one. It's a lot to process.
It really is. Our mission today is to try and make sense of this escalating month-long U.S.-Israeli war with Iran. And we are pulling from a really wide array of sources for this.
Yeah, we've got detailed combat reports from the Institute for the Study of War, investigations from the human rights activists in Iran Consortium.
Right. Plus raw economic data, widespread domestic news coverage. I mean, we are currently 30 days into this conflict.
30 days in, yeah.
And we are going to examine it by looking at, well, the physical battlefield, the intense economic ripple effects, the vast gap in diplomatic negotiations, and maybe most surprisingly, the unprecedented domestic unrest that's fracturing the social fabric in both the U.S. and Israel.
Which is arguably as significant as the military action itself.
Definitely. But really quickly, before we jump into the mechanics of all this, I need to offer a very clear disclaimer to everyone listening.
Oh, absolutely. Essential for this topic.
Right. So the sources we are utilizing today contain highly charged political content and significantly differing narratives from multiple governments, militaries, and factions. We are not endorsing any of these viewpoints.
Not at all.
We are simply here to impartially analyze the facts, the data, and the claims presented in the source material to help you form your own understanding of what is, frankly, a deeply complex situation.
It is a profound level of complexity. I mean, when we examine these reports, what emerges isn't just some localized military conflict. We are looking at a real-time stress test of the entire global system.
A stress test. I like that phrasing.
Yeah, because modern systems are so tightly woven together that, a tactical military decision in the Middle East instantly triggers this cascade of economic and social shockwaves across the globe.
So to understand those global shockwaves, we first have to understand the epicenter. Let's look at the kinetic battlefield.
Right, what's actually happening on the ground.
And in the air. According to the data from the Institute for the Study of War, the initial phase has been this massive air campaign. The U.S. and Israel have struck 4 key Iranian ballistic missile facilities.
That's Kojir, Sharud, Parchin, and Hakimiyya, right?
Exactly. Those 4, along with at least 29 different launch bases.
And the underlying strategy here is containment through degradation. The alliance isn't just randomly targeting infrastructure. They are specifically hunting the supply chains for solid and liquid fuel ballistic missiles.
So it's about stopping the assembly line.
Exactly. The mechanism of this air campaign is designed to surgically remove Iran's ability to manufacture and launch long-range munitions. They're effectively attempting to dismantle their offensive reach before it can even be fully utilized.
And the scale of that degradation is just staggering. I mean, the military sources indicate over 11,000 targets have been hit in just a matter of weeks.
11,000. It's a massive number.
It is, and President Trump has publicly claimed that the U.S. is systematically decimating Iran's naval capabilities and is successfully achieving regime change.
Right. That's the official narrative from the top.
But when you turn to the human rights reporting, a starkly different reality of this air campaign is playing out on the ground.
Yeah, the reports from the human rights activists in Iran, or HRA, completely counter the narrative of a pristine surgical war.
They really do.
They have documented nearly 1,500 Iranian civilians killed in these strikes. And devastatingly, that number includes at least 217 children.
Which is just awful.
It is. And it forces us to look at the severe limitations of aerial intelligence in dense urban environments.
Right. And there's one specific tragedy in the sources that illustrates exactly how those intelligence limitations lead to, well, absolute catastrophe.
You're talking about the strike in Manab.
Yeah, in the city of Manab. An airstrike hit a girls' school that was located immediately adjacent to a military facility. And the resulting strike killed 168 children.
Just heartbreaking.
It is. And the HRA report notes that the school had actually been walled off from the military base in recent years. It was a physical separation that analysts utilizing satellite imagery apparently just missed or misinterpreted.
And that demonstrates the fatal flaw in relying exclusively on standoff explosive munitions, no matter how advanced the targeting algorithms are.
Right, because the computer just sees shapes.
Exactly. A satellite can show you the heat signature of a building, but it cannot always tell you the societal context of the structure right next door. Especially when the geography has subtly shifted over a few years, like with that wall.
It just proves that a strategic air campaign invariably translates into a profound human toll when it's executed over populated areas,
It always does.
which makes the next development in the military reports incredibly significant. Despite the early narrative that this war would be fought and won exclusively from the air, U.S. ground forces are now physically arriving in the region.
Yeah, this is a huge pivot.
We are looking at 2,500 Marines and sailors deployed on the USS Tripoli, alongside elements of the elite 82nd Airborne Division.
And the introduction of ground forces fundamentally changes the calculus of the entire conflict.
See, I have to push back on the military logic here, though. If the U.S. and Israel have successfully hit 11,000 targets, and they are genuinely degrading these missile facilities from the
Yeah.
sky.
If the air campaign is working,
Exactly. What is this strategic vulnerability that suddenly requires inserting the 82nd Airborne? Why risk boots on the ground if the air campaign is supposedly achieving its goals?
well, because air power has a ceiling. I mean, you can bomb a facility into rubble to stop production, sure, but you cannot secure a physical asset from 30,000 feet.
Oh, I see.
Yeah, if the strategic goal shifts from merely punishing Iran to actually neutralizing their core leverage, say physically seizing and removing their stockpiles of enriched uranium, or securing a specific maritime choke point, you absolutely have to put personnel in the facility. You have to hold the terrain.
But inserting troops into this specific environment seems extraordinarily precarious. The sources mention the Iranian regime's counter-mobilization, a campaign they are calling Janfada, which literally translates to sacrificing life.
And that is the exact asymmetric trap the Iranians are setting.
A trap.
Yeah, their parliament speaker openly stated they are waiting for U.S. ground troops to arrive so they can set them on fire. They are not preparing to fight a conventional tank battle in the desert. The Janfada campaign indicates they are organizing a highly decentralized, suicide-driven resistance.
They want urban combat.
Exactly. They want to draw conventional Western forces into an urban, grueling quagmire where advanced technology is basically neutralized by sheer attrition.
But deploying and sustaining elements like the 82nd Airborne requires immense, continuous logistical supply lines. And those supply lines rely on open oceans.
Which brings us to the global economy.
Right. How the tactical battlefield is directly weaponizing the global economy. Because Iran has turned its focus to the Strait of Hormuz, which is one of the most vital shipping lanes on the planet.
They recognize that they don't need to defeat the U.S. Navy in a direct confrontation to win an economic victory. They just need to make the waters unnavigable for Western interests.
Right, but looking at the tracking data in our sources, it's not a full blockade. I mean, they aren't putting a physical chain across the water.
No, not at all.
They are selectively allowing certain Chinese vessels, like those from Costco and Pakistani ships, to pass through completely untouched while aggressively targeting or seizing Western vessels. It's like a highly curated blockade.
It is, and it's brilliant in a dark way because they have weaponized the mechanism of maritime insurance.
How does that work?
Well, they don't have to sink every American or European cargo ship. By selectively targeting Western vessels, they drive the maritime insurance premiums for Allied ships to mathematically impossible rates.
Oh, so it just becomes too expensive to sail.
Precisely. The insurers at Lloyd's of London simply won't underwrite the voyage. So the Iranians are effectively freezing Western supply chains without firing a shot at every single ship, while simultaneously protecting their alliances with China and regional partners by letting their cargo flow freely.
And when you look at the economic data, the impact of that insurance freeze is immediate. The international benchmark, Brent crude oil, has spiked to $115 a barrel.
And that hurts everyone.
It does. That doesn't just stay on a spreadsheet. That translates directly into the cost of transportation, manufacturing, your weekly groceries fueling inflation across the entire global economy.
Which puts immense pressure on political leaders back home.
Absolutely. And in response to this economic stranglehold, President Trump has issued a severe ultimatum. Open the strait by April 6th, or the U.S. will obliterate Iranian power plants, oil wells, and the Karg Island oil terminal.
Striking Kharg Island would be a massive escalation because it handles the vast majority of Iran's crude exports. I mean, it would be a definitive attempt to collapse their domestic economy entirely.
But the map of this conflict is rapidly expanding, bringing in new players and new technologies. Yemen's Houthis have officially entered the fray, firing their first ballistic missiles at Israel and threatening the Bab el-Mandeb Strait in the Red Sea.
The choke points are multiplying.
And crucially, the reports indicate Russia is actively aiding Iran by providing them with real-time satellite imagery of U.S., UK, and Turkish bases in the region.
See, the involvement of Russia changes the technological balance of power. Historically, proxy groups and regional powers relied on delayed or degraded intelligence.
Like photos from hours ago.
Right. But if Russia is providing real-time, military-grade satellite telemetry, Iran can track the movement of U.S. assets, anticipate strikes, and target allied bases with unprecedented precision. It totally removes the element of surprise.
So with oil prices soaring, multiple shipping lanes under threat, and Russia actively supplying intelligence, how are traditional U.S. allies absorbing this pressure? Because you would assume the NATO coalition would just lock arms, but the sources show something entirely different.
We are actually seeing a significant fracturing of traditional alliances, mostly driven by domestic self-interest.
Like what's happening with Spain.
A prime example. As a NATO ally, you would expect full logistical cooperation. Instead, Spain has outright banned U.S. military flights from utilizing its airspace for any operations related to this war.
That is a massive logistical hurdle. I mean, if you can't fly heavy transport planes over Spain, you have to reroute over much longer distances.
Which requires more mid-air refueling.
Exactly, and it delays the deployment of assets and troops to the Middle East.
It throws a major wrench into the entire deployment schedule. But on the other hand, we see unexpected alliances forming through technology transfers.
Oh, this part was fascinating.
Yeah, Ukraine is stepping in to offer anti-drone defense expertise to Gulf states like Qatar and the United Arab Emirates.
But how does a country currently fighting for its own survival against Russia have the bandwidth to help Qatar?
Because they aren't sending troops, they are exporting algorithms.
Software.
Right. Ukraine has spent years developing software and tactical blueprints to defeat the exact same Iranian-made Shahed drones that are now threatening Gulf infrastructure.
That makes sense.
It represents a remarkable collision of global conflicts, where the tactical innovations forged in the war in Europe are being directly exported to defend airspace in the Middle East.
With the military and economic costs mounting so rapidly, the pressure to find a diplomatic off-ramp is immense. Pakistan has stepped in to attempt to broker talks between the two sides.
Thank goodness someone is trying.
Right, but looking at the demands outlined in our sources, it feels like the U.S. and Iran are living in completely different realities.
The diplomatic positions are currently irreconcilable. I mean, they're miles apart.
Well, the U.S. has put forward a sweeping 15-point demand list, spearheaded by figures like Vice President J.D. Vance, Secretary of State Marco Rubio, and Jared Kushner. The demands require taking physical possession of Iran's enriched uranium and demand an absolute end to all of Iran's proxy networks across the region.
Pretty steep demands.
Very. Conversely, Iran has countered with a 5-point proposal. They are demanding a complete halt to military operations, guaranteed undisputed sovereignty over the Strait of Hormuz, and crucially, the payment of war reparations from the United States.
Those aren't starting points for negotiation. Those are demands for total capitulation from both sides.
But here is the glaring contradiction in the sources. President Trump recently told reporters on Air Force One that he is dealing with a, quote, more reasonable new regime in Tehran, and suggested that a deal could happen very soon.
Right, painting a very optimistic picture.
But meanwhile, Iran's foreign ministry is publicly broadcasting that the U.S. demands are excessive and unreasonable, and outright denying that direct talks are even taking place.
Yeah, this is a classic example of dual-track communication in high-stakes negotiations.
Meaning what, exactly?
Meaning you have to separate the public posturing from the private signaling. Both administrations are aggressively playing to their domestic audiences.
Oh, I see.
The U.S. leadership needs to project dominance and the imminence of victory to maintain political support, while the Iranian regime must project unyielding defiance to justify the immense suffering of its populace.
But wait. Playing to a domestic audience only works if the audience actually believes the narrative, right? If Iranian citizens are facing daily airstrikes and American citizens are paying astronomical prices for gas, does this public posturing actually land? Or does it just make the leadership look disconnected from the reality on the ground?
That is the precise danger they are running. The disconnect breeds severe domestic resentment. Furthermore, even if the back channels somehow produced a simple ceasefire, it wouldn't solve the structural drivers of the war.
Right. It just pauses things.
Exactly. A ceasefire stops the shooting today, but it does nothing to address Iran's threshold nuclear capabilities. It also ignores the escalating situation in Lebanon, where Israel is actively carving out an expanded military buffer zone against Hezbollah, a campaign that has recently resulted in the deaths of UN peacekeepers and journalists.
The roots of the conflict are simply too deep for a quick diplomatic fix.
Way too deep.
Which brings us to the most visceral consequence of this diplomatic failure. The inability to resolve the conflict, combined with the crushing economic strain, has triggered a spectacular eruption of domestic unrest.
And we are seeing it everywhere.
The institutions tasked with sustaining this war are paralyzing from the inside out.
The domestic fallout is proving to be just as destabilizing as the kinetic battlefield itself.
The scale of the civil unrest detailed in the sources is historic. Under the banner of the No Kings protests, an estimated 8 million people poured into the streets across all 50 U.S. states.
8 million.
Organizers are classifying it as the largest single day of protest in American history. And the political ramifications are immediate, with polling data showing President Trump's approval rating plummeting to 36%.
And a remarkably parallel dynamic is unfolding in Israel.
Really?
In what way?
Well, for the first time, the movement protesting the war has actively merged with the groups that have spent months protesting the government's judicial overhaul.
Oh, wow, they joined forces. They have. They formed a massive unified opposition front, arguing that the leadership's domestic and foreign policies are equally destructive.
And the institutional chaos in the U.S. right now is staggering. The Department of Homeland Security is currently experiencing the longest shutdown in U.S. history. We are seeing TSA agents quitting en masse.
Which is a huge vulnerability.
And when security personnel walk off the job, you don't just get long lines at the airport, you freeze domestic aviation, which further cripples the economy.
Right.
Meanwhile, at the Pentagon, Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth is facing immense internal backlash for personally intervening to block the promotions of minority and female generals.
Yeah, that story has really blown up.
His rhetoric surrounding the war has become so polarizing that he was publicly rebuked by Pope Leo XIV during Palm Sunday Mass.
I mean, when you have the defense apparatus mired in scandal and Homeland Security physically shutting down, the overarching framework of national stability really begins to buckle.
It does.
And unfortunately, we are seeing that tension spill over into domestic extremism.
We are. The sources outlined a deeply concerning thwarted arson attack by the Jewish Defense League, which targeted the home of Palestinian-American activist Nordine Kiswani in New York.
It's terrifying.
And alongside this surge in domestic extremism, we are also seeing massive corporate reckonings coming to a head. Bank of America just agreed to a $72.5 million settlement to resolve lawsuits regarding its financial ties to Jeffrey Epstein's sex trafficking ring.
Now, it is important to clearly state that the Bank of America settlement is a completely separate legal matter and is not caused by the war.
Right. Completely separate issue.
However, the timing is critical to analyze. When a government asks its citizens to bear the heavy economic and human costs of a massive overseas conflict, it relies entirely on baseline institutional trust.
And that trust is fragile.
Exactly. When citizens are marching in the streets and simultaneously watching massive financial institutions settle trafficking lawsuits, that baseline trust shatters. The compounding effect creates a profound national mood of disillusionment.
It's as if the pressure cooker safety valve has been welded shut by the war, and the steam is violently escaping through every single crack in American and Israeli society.
That's a very apt way to put it.
So synthesizing all of this data, I have to ask the ultimate question. Can any nation successfully project sustained military power abroad when its own homeland security apparatus is shut down, its military leadership is embroiled in scandal, and 8 million of its citizens are actively marching against the government?
Historically, the data suggests no. Warfare is never merely geographical. It is profoundly, deeply domestic.
Because you need the people on board.
Right. The ability to wage a sustained, multi-front war relies entirely on the resilience of the social contract at home. The populace has to willingly absorb the economic shockwaves, and they must believe in the institutions managing the conflict.
Which they currently don't seem to.
Exactly. What the source material across all these domains is showing us is that this social contract is fracturing under the immense weight of the escalation.
It is a massive amount of information to process. Let's quickly recap the journey we've taken through these sources today. We started by examining the kinetic reality of 11,000 airstrikes against Iranian missile facilities and the tragic human cost of targeting failures in urban areas like Minab.
We really covered a lot of ground.
We did. We explored the strategic shift from an air campaign to the precarious deployment of ground forces like the 82nd Airborne into an asymmetrical battlefield,
We then analyzed how Iran weaponized maritime insurance in the Strait of Hormuz to drive oil to $115 a barrel.
and how the technological landscape is shifting, with Russia supplying satellite telemetry and Ukraine exporting anti-drone algorithms.
We looked at the immense disconnect in the diplomatic negotiations, where the maximalist demands of both sides make a resolution highly improbable.
And finally, we examined the historic domestic fallout, the 8 million person protests, the DHS shutdown, and the fracturing of institutional trust.
It's all connected.
When you connect all these dots, it becomes incredibly clear why this matters directly to you. This deep dive illustrates the absolute collapse of the idea that foreign policy happens in a vacuum.
It never does.
A distant geopolitical standoff is the exact mechanism driving the inflation at your grocery store, the gridlock at your local airport, and the historical shifts in the social fabric of your own community.
I want to leave you with a final thought to mull over, building on everything we've discussed today.
Okay, let's hear it.
We still habitually think of war in terms of physical borders, trenches, and defined battlefields. But if a ballistic missile strike in Tehran can instantaneously trigger a massive protest in St. Paul, Minnesota, while simultaneously freezing the maritime insurance markets in London and halting global shipping,
Right.
has the very definition of a front line fundamentally changed? In a hyper-connected world where economic and social shockwaves travel globally at the speed of light, are we all now living on the front lines of every conflict?
A chilling but incredibly necessary question to consider. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive into the sources. Keep looking closely at the systems around you. And as always, keep questioning the information.